This video is based on real events and contains discussions of violence, crime, and other disturbing subject matter. Some viewers may find the content upsetting. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
I'm Dom and Davion. I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm hurt.
July 31, 2022, 2:53 in the morning. Dominic Russo sent his father a text message. 3 words, "I love you, Dad." He was 20 years old. He would be dead before sunrise. Netflix made a documentary about what happened that morning. It's called The Crash. Tens of millions of people watched it. And when the credits rolled, most of them thought they understood this case. They didn't, because there is evidence in this case, hard, documented, forensic evidence, reviewed and upheld on appeal all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court, that the crash never showed you. Evidence that doesn't just add context to the story Netflix told, evidence that changes the story entirely. The GPS data that places the driver at the exact crash location 3 days before the crash. The black box, 4 separate forensic findings locked inside that car in the final 4.6 seconds before impact. The sworn witness testimony that Netflix never touched. We are going to go through all of it, one piece at a time. This is not a recap of the crash. This is the record the crash left out. Before we continue, this is real. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were real people. They had families, dreams, and futures ahead of them. Those families are still living with this loss every single day. Some of what follows is difficult. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Everything you hear in this video is drawn directly from court records, trial testimony, appellate rulings, and documented investigative findings, not speculation, the record. This is not a recap of what Netflix showed you. This is a forensic review of what the court record actually contains. 4 categories of evidence. First, the physical forensic data. The vehicle's event data recorder, the black box, and what it captured in the final 4.6 seconds before impact. Second, electronic device data. GPS location records from Shirilla's phone and independent speed tracking from the Life 360 app. Third, the behavioral record. Nearly 93,000 text messages between Shirilla and Russo, videos recovered from Russo's phone, and sworn witness testimony about a threat made less than a month before July 31st. Fourth, the legal record. The bench trial, every level of the appeals process, and what the Ohio Supreme Court ultimately decided. One standard applies throughout this video. When we say we know something, it is documented in a court filing, established in sworn testimony, or affirmed in a judicial ruling. If something is our analysis, we will tell you. That is how we work through this. Strongsville, Ohio, 15 miles southwest of Cleveland. Quiet residential streets, strip malls, a business park or 2. The kind of suburb where the pavement is always clean and nothing much happens. July 31, 2022. 5:30 in the morning, most of Strongsville is still asleep. A black 2018 Toyota Camry begins moving through the streets. 3 occupants, a 17-year-old girl behind the wheel, her 20-year-old boyfriend in the front passenger seat. His 19-year-old friend in the rear, 5:33 a.m. The vehicle turns southbound onto Pearl Road. Surveillance cameras capture it moving at a controlled speed. Nothing unusual. Just a car before dawn on a quiet road. 5:34 a.m. It turns westbound onto Progress Drive. That is where everything changes. Progress Drive is a dead-end road cutting through an industrial business park. Posted speed limit, 35 miles per hour, uneven concrete. A pair of curves, a stop sign at the end. Nothing beyond it but the solid brick face of a commercial building. The car does not slow down. It accelerates. An Ohio State Highway Patrol investigator later testified that the vehicle averaged approximately 97, 8 miles per hour through that stretch. His words, "That's beyond unsafe speed for the roadway and conditions." 5:36 a.m. The Camry veers right, crosses the grass, blows through a stop sign and a business sign, and slams into the corner of the Plidco building at 1192 Alameda Drive. The passenger side takes the full force of the impact. The speedometer freezes at 72 miles per hour at the moment of airbag deployment. The car is severed nearly in half. Now here is the detail that stops you cold. The first 911 call was not received until 6:15 a.m. The crash happened at 5:36, 39 minutes, 3 people unconscious in the wreckage on a dead-end road in an empty industrial park before sunrise. Nobody called. When first responders finally arrived, all 3 occupants were unconscious, not breathing, and trapped inside the vehicle. Dominic Russo was pronounced deceased at the scene. Davian Flanagan was pronounced deceased on the way to hospital. Mackenzie Shirilla was airlifted to Metro Health Medical Center. Her alcohol screen came back negative. 2 young men went into that car. Only 1 person came out alive. And the question investigators were about to spend the next year answering, was this an accident at all? His name was Dominic Anthony Russo. Everyone who loved him called him Dom. He was born September 24, 2001, in Strongsville, Ohio, the only town he had ever called home. He grew up in a house that was always full. His parents, Christine and Frank, and 6 siblings: Angelo, Christopher, Nicole, Christine, Michael, and Frank. 7 kids under one roof. By all accounts, it was the kind of household that was always loud, always moving, always full of someone laughing in the next room. Dominic carried that energy with him everywhere he went. He was funny, smart, goal-oriented in the way that some people just are, always thinking about the next thing before the current thing was even finished. By the time he was 20 years old, he had already graduated from Strongsville High School, launched his own clothing brand, was producing his own music, and was actively trading stocks and cryptocurrency. He had a recording studio in the house adjacent to his parents' home, the house where he was living, the house Mackenzie Shirilla had essentially moved into. 2 months before he died, he was building, planning, laying foundations that most people spend a lifetime trying to reach. His sister Christine described him when she spoke publicly after his death. He literally was just starting his life. He was just a baby. He had his whole life ahead of him. She called him kind, funny, and caring. He was the most doting and proud uncle to our children, she said. He was so loved, and he is so indescribably missed. He and Mackenzie Shirilla had been together since around 2018, since he was 16 and she was 13. 4 years. A relationship that had become, by the accounts of those who watched it closely, something far more complicated than it started as. In the early hours of July 31st, a few hours before that car began moving through the streets of Strongsville, Dominic picked up his phone and sent his father a text. "Love you, Dad." Those were the last words he ever sent. He was 20 years old. 2 months from his 21st birthday, his name was Davian Markle Flanagan. He was 19 years old. His beginning was harder than most people will ever know. Davian and his sisters, Divine and Dahlia, spent years in the foster care system when they were young. Their biological parents struggled with substance use and were unable to care for them. At 8 years old, Davian was adopted by Scott and Jamie Flanagan, a family that chose him. He grew up in a home where people showed up for each other, and it showed in everything he did. He graduated from Strongsville High School in 2022. He played football. He was the kind of person who made room for everyone around him. No inner circle, no exclusion, no ego. His father, Scott, described him simply. He didn't have cliques. Anyone who wanted his heart and his time, he was going to be there for them. His mother, Jamie, has said that even now, years later, she sometimes still expects to hear him come through the door. Davion had a clear vision for his future. He wanted to be a barber. He was working full-time, saving his money, and had already begun the application process to Allstate Hairstyling and Barber College in Cleveland. He knew exactly where he was going. He just never got there. He was in that car on July 31st because Dominic was his friend. There is no other reason, no drama of his own. He trusted the people he was with. The Flanagan family has since established a scholarship in his name to help other young people who share his dream reach the future Davion never got to have. Now, Mackenzie Shirilla. She was 17 years old on July 31st, 2022, born August 2004, meaning she was 2 days from turning 18. She and Dominic had been together since she was 13 and he was 16, 4 years. Over time, she had become a near permanent presence in his world, living in his house, embedded in his friend group. She was active on social media, TikTok in particular, where she had built a following posting content around her fashion and lifestyle. She was young, visible, and by most external appearances, deeply attached to Dominic Russo. The prosecution would argue that the relationship had, in the weeks leading up to July 31st, become increasingly volatile, increasingly unstable. Witnesses would testify to that under oath. She had also been diagnosed with a condition called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, a neurological condition that can cause dizziness and, in some cases, episodes of impaired consciousness. Her legal team would attempt to use that diagnosis as a central pillar of her defense at trial. We will examine that argument and everything the documented record says about it in detail. For now, the only thing that matters is this. The court's job and ours is to follow the evidence, not the narrative, not documentary, the record. And that is exactly what we are going to do. By July 2022, the relationship between Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo had become something that the people closest to it struggled to describe as anything other than deeply troubled. Investigators would eventually recover nearly 93,000 text messages exchanged between the two over the course of their relationship. 93,000. That number alone speaks to the intensity of what existed between them. What those messages documented, in exchange after exchange, was a pattern of conflict, of accusations, of escalating volatility that Dominic's own family members would later describe under oath. Dominic's brother Angelo testified that the couple broke up frequently and that he had witnessed repeated negative behavior directed at his brother. Dominic's mother, Christine, testified that in the months leading up to July 31st, the couple were in open conflict, often fighting and making threats toward one another. 3 separate videos were also recovered from Dominic Russo's phone. In those recordings, Shirilla could be heard making direct threats against him and threatening to break into his home. Those videos were entered into evidence at trial. They are part of the public court record. And then there is July 17, 2022, 2 weeks before the crash. A witness testified under oath that during a heated argument, they heard Mackenzie Shirilla say directly to Dominic Russo, "I will crash this car right now." That verbal confrontation ended when Russo got out of the car and was picked up by a friend. He walked away that time. He did not walk away on July 31st, now the night before. On the evening of July 30th, Shirilla, Russo, and Flanagan attended a graduation party at a friend's home, arriving around 10:15 in the evening. A fellow partygoer who testified described the gathering as relaxed. People around a fire, playing games. The 3 stayed through the night and into the early morning. At 5:30 a.m. on July 31st, Life 360 Data, the independent location tracking app connected to Davion Flanagan's phone, recorded the 3 of them leaving. They got into the black 2018 Toyota Camry. Mackenzie Shirilla got behind the wheel. 6 minutes later, the data stops, 5:34 a.m. The Camry turns westbound onto Progress Drive, a controlled turn. That is how a detective later described it in sworn testimony, a controlled turn. The car is not swerving, it is not erratic. It moves with deliberate purpose onto a dead-end road in an empty industrial park before sunrise. Then the speed climbs. Surveillance cameras mounted along the route captured what happened next. That footage was played in open court. It showed the car moving down Progress Drive, headlights on, no sign of deceleration, no hesitation. The road curves slightly. The car holds its line, the speed passes 90 miles per hour. No brake lights appear, not once. At 5:36 a.m., the Camry veers right, crosses the grass, blows through a stop sign and the Plidco business sign, and drives at full speed into the corner of the brick building at 1192 Alameda Drive. The passenger side of the vehicle takes the full force of the impact. The speedometer freezes at 72 miles per hour at the moment of airbag deployment. The car is severed nearly in half. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, when she later reviewed that footage, said this: "She chose a path of death and destruction that day." The first responding officer reached the scene 39 minutes later. His words into his radio, captured on body cam, were these: "This car split in two." He then surveyed the wreckage and said, "This is the worst car crash I've ever seen." Firefighters worked to mechanically extricate all three occupants from what remained of the vehicle. Dominic Russo was pronounced deceased at the scene. Davion Flanagan was pronounced deceased on the way to hospital. Mackenzie Shirilla was removed from the driver's seat and airlifted to Metro Health Medical Center. She was the only one who survived. 2 people trusted the driver of that car. That trust cost them everything. That is the fact at the center of everything that follows. Strongsville Police Department and Ohio State Highway Patrol took control of the scene. The initial question was the same question investigators always ask at a single vehicle crash before sunrise. What happened here? A medical event? A mechanical failure? Loss of control? An accident? They began working through the possibilities methodically. The wreckage was catastrophic, but catastrophic wreckage alone does not establish intent. For that, they needed something more definitive than what they could see with their eyes. They found it inside the car. Every modern vehicle contains an event data recorder, an EDR. You may know it as the black box. It is a device that records operational parameters in the seconds before a collision: speed, throttle position, braking input, steering data. It does not know who is driving. It does not know what legal consequences its data will carry. It simply records what happened. The EDR inside Mackenzie Shirilla's 2018 Toyota Camry had been recording in the final seconds before that building stopped the car. Before we go any further, if you're new here and you want more forensic breakdowns like this one, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We go through these cases the way they deserve to be gone through, with the full record, not just the headline. Back to the investigation. Shirilla never spoke to police, not in the hospital, not after her release. She claimed she had no memory of the crash. 3 months passed while investigators built their case. On November 4th, 2022, Mackenzie Shirilla was arrested on her way home from physical therapy. Court documents alleged she had purposely caused the death of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. She pleaded not guilty. We have been building to this. An event data recorder, an EDR, is a small electronic module built into virtually every modern vehicle manufactured in recent decades. Think of it as the car's own impartial witness. It has no stake in what happened. It has no opinion about who was driving. In the seconds before a collision, it records what the vehicle was doing: speed, throttle position, braking status, steering input, gear selection. It captures what the car experienced, and it does not lie. Mark Sargent, a certified forensic mechanic expert, analyzed the EDR extracted from Mackenzie Shirilla's 2018 Toyota Camry and testified to his findings under oath, what that recorder had captured in the final four. 6 seconds before impact was 4 distinct data points. Each one matters. We are going to go through them one by one. The defense would later characterize this as 5 seconds of black box information. I want you to understand what those 5 seconds actually contain. Forensic finding 1, the accelerator. The accelerator pedal was fully depressed, not at 80%, not at 90%, not a partial input from a foot that shifted as the car entered a bend, 100%. From the moment the EDR begins recording, 6 seconds before that car met the corner of the Plidco building, the accelerator was pinned to the floor, and it did not move. Not at 3 seconds before impact, not at 2, not at 1, not at the moment of airbag deployment. In the language of the official court findings from the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, Shirilla's right foot was pressed to the accelerator's full extent. Sargent testified to this directly on the stand. The EDR also confirmed there was no mechanical malfunction. The accelerator was not stuck. The vehicle had no defect that contributed to the crash. What the recorder documented was a deliberate, sustained human input, foot on floor, pedal pinned, for every single one of those 4.6 seconds, at nearly 100 miles per hour into a brick building. I want you to sit with what that means forensically. A foot that does not move, a pedal that stays at 100% for the entire duration of the available record. That is the first data point. Forensic finding 2. The braking, there was none. In the documented record of those final 4.6 seconds, the service brake pedal was never applied. Not once. 0 braking input before impact at nearly 100 miles per hour. Now understand what that means physiologically, not legally, not analytically, physiologically. At 100 miles per hour, with a collision imminent, the documented human physiological response is to brake. This is not an argument. It is a reflex. One of the most consistent documented responses in collision research. At high speed with impact incoming, the body brakes. It does not wait for a conscious decision, it reacts. The EDR recorded no such reaction. The defense would argue that Shirilla may have lost consciousness before impact, a medical episode connected to her POTS diagnosis. We will examine that argument in full, but consider what the EDR tells us about that theory directly. A person who loses consciousness does not maintain 100% accelerator depression. Muscles relax under unconsciousness. The foot releases. The pedal does not stay pinned. The EDR shows a foot that stayed pinned, and it shows an absence of braking so complete it was not a close reading. There was no partial application, no grazing of the brake pedal, nothing. 4.6 seconds, full acceleration, 0 braking. That is the second data point. Forensic finding 3, the steering. 3 seconds before impact, the vehicle registered a sequence of steering inputs. A small turn to the right, then a small turn to the left, followed by what the court record specifically describes as a significant right-hand turn, 142 degrees of steering, wheel rotation, a hard, rapid yank. This is the most contested piece of EDR data in the case. The defense argued at trial that this rotation could represent a passenger, Russo or Flanagan, grabbing the wheel from inside the car. A desperate attempt in those final seconds to pull the car away from the building. It is not an unreasonable argument on its surface. Here is what makes it forensically insufficient. The EDR records all inputs simultaneously. At the exact moment of that 142-degree steering rotation, at the exact same moment, the accelerator pedal remained at 100% full depression, not 80%, not a partial input, 100%. If a passenger had grabbed the wheel in a struggle, the accelerator data would not be affected. That is true. But what the accelerator data tells you is this. Whoever had their foot on that pedal did not react, did not lift, did not brake, did not change the throttle position by a single percentage point during the entire steering event. The steering wheel moved. The accelerator did not. Together, those two data points form a specific forensic picture. We will address the defense's full argument in detail shortly. That is the third data point. Forensic finding 4. The gear shift. In the 4.7 seconds before the crash, the gear shift was moved back and forth between drive, sequential mode, and neutral. Multiple movements in the final seconds of available road. The prosecution's forensic position, that sequence of gear shift movements is consistent with a passenger attempting to gain control of the vehicle's transmission from inside the car, a person unable to reach the brake pedal from their seat, unable to overpower the accelerator, trying to use the gear shift as the only tool available to slow or stop what was happening. Consider what that means. If that interpretation is correct, and the court accepted it, it means that in the final seconds of their lives, one of the two young men in that car knew something was wrong, and they tried to stop it. What that gear shift pattern is not consistent with is an unconscious driver. An unconscious driver does not shift gears. An unconscious driver does not move. The gear shift moved. 4 forensic findings, 4.6 seconds. The defense called it a small data window. What it actually is the most concentrated evidentiary record in this entire case. Here is the first thing Netflix's documentary did not show you. July 28, 2022. 3 days before the crash, GPS data extracted from Mackenzie Shirilla's phone recorded her location in the area of the intersection of Progress Drive and Alameda Drive in Strongsville. That is the exact crash location. Prosecutor Tim Troop argued at trial that this placed Shirilla at that intersection 3 days before July 31st, conducting what he described as a dry run, familiarizing herself with a dead-end industrial road that, by the court's own description, was a route she had no routine reason to be on. Those are not my words. They are Judge Nancy Margaret Russo's words, spoken at sentencing. Mackenzie alone made the decision to drive the car, to drive an obscure route, a route she visited a few days before, and a route not routinely taken by her. Full transparency on this data point, because this is how we work through evidence. Detective Hazu, testifying in court, did acknowledge that GPS data from mobile phones carries an inherent margin of approximation. It is technically possible she was not at the precise intersection on July 28th. The court heard that concession, and the court still cited the GPS location data in its findings at sentencing in the judge's own spoken ruling. Here is what I want you to understand forensically. The EDR tells you what happened in the final 4.6 seconds before impact. The GPS data tells you what may have been planned 3 days before those 4.6 seconds. These are two completely different categories of evidence. One measures execution, one measures preparation. Netflix's documentary did not address this data point. Here is the second thing Netflix's documentary did not show you: the Life 360 data. Life 360 is a location sharing application. Davian Flanagan had a friend connected to him on the platform. On the morning of July 31st, that friend took a screenshot of Flanagan's real-time location data on the app. What it recorded was this: Davian Flanagan's location moving through Strongsville from 5:30 a.m., reaching speeds of up to 90 miles per hour, and then stopping at 5:36 a.m. That is a completely independent electronic record. It is separate from the EDR, separate from surveillance footage, separate from any instrument deployed by law enforcement. It is a civilian app on a civilian's phone recording a civilian's location data in real time. And it recorded the same event from a completely different technical direction, arriving at the same data point as the EDR, two independent digital systems. One event, one conclusion. Netflix's documentary did not include this independent corroboration. Here is the third thing Netflix's documentary did not show you. Less than 1 month before July 31, 2022, a witness was on the phone with Dominic Russo. During that call, they heard Mackenzie Shirilla, while Russo was in the car with her, say the following: "I will crash this car right now." I want you to understand exactly what category of evidence that is. It is not data extracted from a device. It is not a digital record open to margins of error. It is a human being, under oath, in a court of law, testifying to a specific direct verbal threat involving a car, involving Dominic Russo, made approximately 2 weeks before the crash that took his life. After that incident on July 17th, Russo called his mother and asked to be picked up. A friend drove out and retrieved him. He got out of that car. He survived that day. That witness testimony was introduced at trial. It was part of the evidentiary record. It was evaluated by Judge Nancy Margaret Russo. It contributed to the verdict. Netflix's documentary did not feature it. Now, to be precise about what we are and are not saying, we are not claiming Netflix acted in bad faith. Documentaries involve editorial decisions. Time is limited. Choices are made about what to include and what to leave out. What we are saying is this: when you remove the GPS reconnaissance data, the Life 360 corroboration, and the prior verbal threat from the story, what remains is a story with considerably more room for doubt than the full evidentiary record actually contains. That is the gap. That is what Netflix left out. The prosecution's case against Mackenzie Shirilla operated across 3 distinct evidentiary lanes. We have been through 2 of them. The EDR data addressed intent. The GPS location data addressed preparation. The third lane is the behavioral record. It addressed motive. The text messages first. Nearly 93,000 messages were exchanged between Shirilla and Russo over the course of their relationship. The prosecution did not attempt to use these as standalone proof of intent. That is not how the behavioral record operated at trial. What the prosecution used them to establish was the documented condition of the relationship, the pattern of conflict, escalation, and volatility that provided the contextual architecture beneath the forensic evidence. What those messages show across years of exchanges is a relationship that cycled repeatedly through conflict and rupture. Russo's own text described being physically struck, having objects thrown at him. As far back as March 2022, 4 months before the crash, he texted that she had hit me and tried to throw a rock at me, and warned her she was driving like a maniac. The prosecution used those exchanges not as the centerpiece of their case, but as the foundation beneath it. Context, pattern, a record of what this relationship had become. The videos from Russo's phone, 3 separate recordings were recovered from Dominic Russo's device. In those videos, Shirilla can be heard threatening him directly and threatening to break into his home and damage his property. Russo filmed these interactions himself. That detail is significant. A person who is documenting incidents in real time is a person who understood, on some level, that what was happening needed to be recorded. These are not inferences from data. These are recordings, her voice, her words, entered into evidence at trial as part of a documented escalating pattern. And now the prior verbal threat connected back to its proper place in the full picture. We established this in Section 10, July 17, 2022. Shirilla and Russo are in a car together on Interstate 71. A friend of Russo's is on the phone with him and hears Shirilla say, "I will crash this car right now." When that friend arrives to collect Russo, he finds the car pulled over on the side of the road, the passenger door open, and Shirilla striking Dominic with both hands. Russo gets out of the car. He leaves. He survived that day. The prosecution's argument was not that July 17th was a unique incident. It was that July 17th was the most visible point on a documented continuum. Text messages going back years, videos recorded by the victim himself, a physical altercation on a highway 2 weeks before the crash, in which Shirilla explicitly threatened to crash the car with Russo inside it. The same threat, the same car, the same passenger. 2 weeks later, on a dead-end road at 5:36 in the morning, carried through to a different conclusion. Prosecutor Tim Troop stated the framework plainly after the verdict. There's no doubt that this happened because of the relationship with Dominic, and the defendant's intent was clearly to end that, and she took everybody that was in the car with her. 3 lanes. Motive, the behavioral record. Intent, the EDR. Premeditation, the GPS visit 3 days prior, 3 independent evidentiary streams, all pointing in the same direction. We have been through the evidence. Now we go through the defense. The goal here is not dismissal. Every accused person is entitled to a vigorous defense, and this case was no different. The goal is to show what the court found when it evaluated each argument against the documented record, methodically, on its own terms. Defense argument 1, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. POTS. POTS is a real condition. It is a disorder of the autonomic nervous system that can cause dizziness, lightheadedness, and in some cases, episodic loss of consciousness. Shirilla had been diagnosed with it in 2017. Her mother, Natalie, testified at trial that she had witnessed her daughter faint on more than one occasion. The defense argued that a sudden involuntary medical episode, a POTS-triggered blackout at the wheel, may explain what happened on Progress Drive. Here is what the documented record shows in response to that argument. No medical records and no expert medical testimony were produced at trial to clinically establish that a POTS episode caused the specific crash event on July 31st, 2022. The condition was raised as a theoretical explanation without evidentiary support confirming it as the operative cause. The prosecution argued the opposite, that the car had continued to accelerate as it approached the building, which is inconsistent with the profile of an unconscious driver, and that Shirilla herself, after the crash, signed a declaration for a temporary driver's license stating she did not have any condition that results in episodic impairment of consciousness or loss of muscular control. And consider what the EDR tells us about the POTS theory directly. Loss of consciousness causes muscle relaxation. The body goes limp. A person who loses consciousness at the wheel does not maintain 100% accelerator depression for 6 continuous seconds. The foot releases. The EDR shows a foot that did not release. After conviction, Shirilla's new legal team filed a post-conviction motion arguing the original trial attorneys had only cursorily referenced the POTS diagnosis and should have built a fuller medical case around it. That is a different argument from the one presented at trial. The courts addressed it accordingly. Defense argument 2, 5 seconds of black box information. That is how the defense characterized the EDR record in court. And technically, that framing is accurate. 5 seconds is 5 seconds. But here is what 5 seconds at 100 miles per hour contains. 733 feet of documented travel, 100% throttle depression uninterrupted, 0 braking input, a 142-degree steering rotation. A gear shift moved back and forth between drive, sequential, and neutral. All of it simultaneously recorded by a device with no stake in the outcome. The question before the court was never the length of the data window. It was what the data within that window established, evaluated alongside the GPS evidence, the behavioral record, and the prior verbal threat. The court evaluated the totality. That is how evidentiary records work. Defense argument 3, the steering rotation. The defense argued the 142-degree wheel movement may represent a passenger grabbing for control. We addressed this in Section 9. but it bears stating again plainly here. During the steering event, the accelerator did not move. 100%, sustained through the entire duration. Whatever was happening at the steering column, the person with their foot on the throttle pedal did not react to it, not by a single percentage point. The wheel moved, the accelerator did not. The court found that distinction significant. Defense argument 4. Ineffective assistance of counsel raised post-conviction. After the verdict, Shirilla's new legal team filed motions arguing the original trial attorneys had failed to adequately present the Potts evidence and other critical material. The 8th District Court of Appeals reviewed the conviction and upheld it in September 2024. The Ohio Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal in April 2025. A further post-conviction petition was filed in 2026. It was rejected, not on its merits, but because it had been filed one day late. The defense had failed to account for 2024 being a leap year. The court found it lacked jurisdiction to consider the filing. Every court at every level of review has examined this case and upheld the conviction. The record is consistent. Mackenzie Shirilla did not testify at her trial. She exercised her right to remain silent, a right she was fully entitled to. But she and her legal team made one further strategic decision that is worth examining carefully. They waived the right to a jury trial. In a bench trial, a single judge decides the verdict. No jury, no panel of 12 civilians. The outcome rests entirely with one legally trained person whose career has been built around the evaluation of evidence. Defense teams make this calculation for specific considered reasons. When a case carries significant emotional weight, when the victims are young, when the circumstances are visceral, when the prosecution carries a compelling and humanizing narrative, a legally trained judge is generally considered less susceptible to that emotional power than a civilian jury. The theory is straightforward. A judge will dissect the evidence more clinically, apply stricter legal scrutiny to circumstantial proof, and separate what is emotionally compelling from what is legally established. In a case involving 2 young men killed on a dead-end road before sunrise in circumstances captured on surveillance footage, with a relationship documented across nearly 93,000 text messages, the defense calculated that the emotional weight of this case represented a greater risk in front of 12 jurors than the forensic evidence represented in front of a single judge. That was the calculation. And it is worth remembering when we examine what the judge actually found. The bench trial began on August 7, 2023. It ran for 4 days. Shirilla did not take the stand. On August 14, 2023, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo delivered her verdict, guilty on all counts. Her findings were deliberate and specific. She referenced the surveillance footage of the crash. She referenced the GPS location data placing Shirilla at the crash site 3 days prior. She referenced the text message record. She referenced the prior verbal threat made on July 17th. She evaluated the EDR data. Not one category of the prosecution's evidence was dismissed or minimized. The judge described what the surveillance footage showed. She morphs from a responsible driver to literal hell on wheels as she makes her way down the street. Her verdict finding: her actions were controlled, methodical, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful. This was not reckless driving, this was murder. And then she had a mission and she executed it with precision. The decision was death. These are not a judge being swept up in the emotion of the moment. These are judicial findings stated from the bench on the public record after 4 days of testimony. They reflect what a legally trained mind concluded after evaluating the full evidentiary picture without a jury in the room. The defense chose a bench trial because they believed a judge would be harder to move than a jury. They were wrong. But the fact that they made that calculation at all tells you something about how the defense assessed the emotional power of this case before the trial even began. August 14, 2023. Mackenzie Shirilla was found guilty on all 12 counts. 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, 1 count of possessing criminal tools. 1 week later, on August 21st, 2023, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo sentenced her to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life in prison. Her driver's license was permanently suspended. Her first parole eligibility date is October 2037. She is currently incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, Ohio. Before the sentence was read, Shirilla addressed the court. Sobbing, she said, "I am heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion. We were all friends, and Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take all your pain away. I am so sorry." She said she wished she could remember what happened. She maintains her innocence, a position she repeated on camera in the Netflix documentary. Dominic's brother Angelo spoke before sentencing. His words were plain. Kenzie killed Dom over the thought of losing him, and she made Davion collateral damage. Davion's mother, Jamie, told the court that her son is and always will be so much more than cargo in the back of the car. 5 independent categories of evidence. 5 separate investigative streams. The EDR, 100% accelerator depression, 0 braking, 142-degree steering rotation. The GPS, Shirilla's phone at the crash location 3 days prior. The Life 360 data, independent speed corroboration from a separate digital system. The behavioral record, nearly 93,000 text messages, recovered videos, a verbal threat made 2 weeks before the crash. The judicial record. Every court at every level of review upheld the conviction. All arriving at the same conclusion, we started with a text message, 2:53 in the morning, Dominic Russo, 3 words to his father. "I love you, Dad." What followed in the 2 hours and 43 minutes after those words were sent is now a matter of documented public record. What the investigation produced is 5 independent categories of evidence reviewed at every level of the Ohio court system across 3 years. The record does not leave a significant gap. But the record is not the whole story. The people are. Dominic's sister Christine launched a podcast in April 2026 called The Big Sister, Unhinged. She speaks about her brother, about navigating grief, and about the warning signs of toxic relationships in young people. She is also working with the Flanagan family and Ohio lawmakers to pass Dom and Davion's Law, Victims Before Influencers, a legislative push to modernize Ohio's Sons of Sam laws for the social media era. Because, as Christine put it, no victim's family should have to watch the person who killed their loved one turn that crime into attention, followers, donations, sponsorships, merchandise, paid interviews, documentaries, social media income, or other personal benefits. The Flanagan family established a scholarship for aspiring barbers to give other young people access to the future Davion Flanagan, worked every single day toward and never got to reach. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were 20 and 19 years old. They got into a car and trusted the people around them. That is the beginning and end of what they did. Everything else in this case belongs to the record. And the record, as we have gone through today, is clear. If this breakdown was useful to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We go through these cases the way they deserve to be gone through, with the full record, not just the headline. The links to the official court documents are in the description below.